We have breaking news tonight regarding the FBI and ICE raid on the IQ-145 Somali lawyer office in Minneapolis.
5:12 a.m., Cedar-Riverside, Minneapolis, Minnesota. The radio crackles on. Stack up. Someone answers. Target, an immigration law office. It sounds like the wrong address, until the number shows up. $187.3 million moved through client trust accounts in 28 months. 29 firearms stored in layers, not for display. And in their case management software, 18,420 files, only 6,140 matched real, verifiable traces. The rest looked like they were created to disappear right on time. The name on record is Ismail Noordik, a lawyer, a Somali man in Minnesota. People whispered a number, IQ 145. But what bothered agents was not IQ, it was how he ran things. He did not ask who. He asked what stage the file was in. He did not ask how much. He asked who had the power to change a status. He did not build a place to hide things. He built a place to control paperwork. 5:08, 4 minutes before the team arrived, something happened. A wave of files changed status in the same rhythm. No email, no phone call, just data lines flipping to processed, like someone pressed a button from the dark. The glass front stayed still. The appointment calendar stayed neat. The reception desk stayed clean. But everything being too right made it wrong. A hand went to the door handle. And in that exact moment, what made the whole team go cold was no longer the money or the guns. It was this thought: if he already knew they were coming, then inside that room, what was waiting? The glass door opened after an oddly slow beat. Not stuck, not a broken lock. Just slow, like the push had been predicted. Inside, no screaming, no one running, nothing shattering. The reception desk was spotless. Chairs were squared up. Files were set to the right size, the right edge. Everything was so right, it stopped feeling natural. The radio filled the space. Left is clear. Right is clear. No one located. They called it clear, and nobody relaxed. This kind of clean felt like it had been done on the clock. The team split into layers. One element held the waiting area. One element went straight to the back, where the light felt different. Not brighter, not darker, just colder. Between the two areas was a side door. No sign, no window. Cross-bolted. New hinges. That door cut the back area off from everything else. Anyone outside the system could not get through. Right as the team stopped at the door, an internal alert from legal popped up. The office had just filed an emergency motion arguing the scope of the search warrant. Not to win, to drag the calendar, to throw a layer of paperwork noise at the exact moment the team had to decide, keep pushing or wait. The decision came fast. The door opened. Behind it was the real work zone. Not desks and chairs. Status, screens dark, drawers locked. Low cabinets tight to the wall, no labels. Everything sat in the right place, like the designer expected everyone to look somewhere else. The lights shifted tone, barely, just enough to make the eyes adjust. And in that moment, the silence tore open. A short sound. Dry. The radio cut in with a blunt line. Someone's been hit. No details. No hero talk. Just orders stacked on orders, feet pounding, and then a sudden quiet when the area was secured. The standoff ended fast, but it left a hollow space everyone could feel. When things settled, two people were restrained at the deepest point inside. Ismail Noordik did not fight. He did not look at the agents. His eyes locked on a low spot near the wall, an unmarked file cabinet. No outside lock, like there was nothing worth noticing. Hani Ayan Kali was slumped off to one side. Her arm reached toward the work desk, stopped in midair, like it was missing one last move. The team opened the cabinet. No cash, no familiar items, just a cross-reference grid, columns for file codes, timestamps, statuses, short marks. One page alone said nothing. Side by side, they clicked into place. Not a story, a control system. The next safe popped open. Inside were printed trust account statements. Money split small, cycling, on schedule. No jumps, no strange peaks. Funds moved through like they were measured out. The device sat in a spot that did not show off. Not buried, not displayed. Set exactly where an operator could reach without thinking. When the screen came on, the access logs appeared. Waves of file status changes inside the same minute. No errors, no lag, no extra, too clean. One agent stood at the screen a beat longer. "No one can do this by hand," he said quietly. Nobody answered, because everyone understood. This was not fast fingers. This was design. The low drawer near the floor opened last. What was inside was not hung up, not wrapped, not shown off. Firearms stored in layers, set at points only someone who knew the room could reach. Not for everyday use. To wait. Now the pieces started to line up. This office was not a place to hide crime. It was a place to coordinate it. Paperwork was the control board. Status was the lever. The calendar was the rail. When risk showed up, the system changed cycles before people did. One agent turned back to Ismail. He stayed silent, no challenge, no pleading, just the look of someone who counted the steps ahead and knew exactly where he lost. Not at the door, not at the guns, but at one piece of data outside this room, something he did not own. No one said more, because now everyone understood. They had touched the core, and this core did not live only in this room. This was not just a law office doing things wrong, and it was not just illegal money or weapons. The danger was somewhere else. In most cases, evidence is what gets hidden. Here, the evidence sat right in front of them, and it looked completely legitimate. The files were the right template. The order was right. The deadlines were right. The signatures were right. There was nothing forcing the system to stop. Ismatil Noordik did not need to lie. He only needed to make sure everything passed through enough steps. And once everything passed through enough steps, the system automatically treated it as safe. No one asked why, because there was no clear reason to ask. No one stopped, because there was no obvious error to stop. The problem was not what he hid. The problem was how he arranged things, so no one had to feel suspicious. They did not need to lie very much. They only needed everything to go through the right steps. The raid touched only the surface. From here, they had to trace the chain of approvals: who signed, who reviewed, who was granted authority, and who chose to look past it. After the raid, everything shifted into a different kind of silence. No more doors being forced, no more shouted commands, just printers humming, paper sliding, and the steady tapping of keyboards inside an investigator's workroom. They were not sitting there to retell what had just happened. They were there to answer one simple, uncomfortable question: what does this machine run on? Because if this were just a law office doing something wrong, the files would be messy, the money would be sloppy, people would rush and make mistakes. But what they had seen did not look like an impulsive violation. It looked like something arranged in advance, running smoothly, and only resisting when someone touched the core. The investigative team did not start by reading every file. No one had the time, and no one was foolish enough to try. They started with something faster: timing. They pulled the change history from the office's case management system. Each file was a line. Each documents received, in process, completed, closed was a marker. On the screen, it was just steps. Put together, it became a work cycle. When they laid everything out on a timeline, one thing surfaced immediately. The changes were not spread evenly like a normal office. There were hours where changes clustered tightly, dense enough to resemble a production shift. Then there were long stretches that were strangely clean, as if the entire office vanished while the lights stayed on and the appointment calendar kept running. Investigators did not need to know what was written inside each file to recognize one thing: the rhythm was not random. From there, they moved to the second layer: authority. Who could create a file? Who could edit it? Who could certify it? Who could close it? In a real workplace, authority is usually scattered and messy, shaped by people. Here, authority was not crudely concentrated in a single account. It was gathered more carefully. It was embedded into mandatory steps. No matter who did the work, everything still had to pass through a few nodes that only a small number of people could touch. They rebuilt the office's approval chain by order of authority and signature. At certain steps, the signature or confirmation always looped back to the same person, in the same style, with the same habits. At other steps, edits always followed the same pattern. Very small, very by the book, and almost always followed immediately by a confirmation mark. Not because people were diligent, because they needed to stamp it in rhythm. At this point, the so-called IQ 145 no longer needed to be mentioned. It was visible in the structure itself. The designer did not try to make things complex. The designer made things simple enough to control. No need for hundreds of secrets, just a few critical pressure points and a few people who were never truly rotated out. After authority came the third layer: money flow. They pulled statements from the client trust accounts. These are accounts the system is built to trust because they are tied to professional duty and responsibility. The investigators did not read each line like a novel. They looked for patterns. Money coming in was usually small, spread out, and continuous. Money going out followed clear cycles. There were periods when outflows clustered in batches. There were transaction descriptions so similar they looked copied. There were approval events confirmed by the same person in very clean time windows. $187.3 million in 28 months by itself did not tell the full story. But placed next to the case timeline, it began to speak differently. There were days when files shifted status in bulk, and within that same time window, the money moved in matching rhythms. There were bursts where files closed at unusual speed, followed immediately by cyclical disbursements or transfers. The money was not moving independently. It was moving to the rhythm of the files. Then they reached the fourth route: certifications and notarized paperwork. This is the layer that allows cases like this to live a long time, because certifications can look clean, signatures can look proper, notary seals can look perfect. The investigators did not need to label them fake or real right away. They only needed to ask when each document appeared, whose hands it passed through, and which status change it triggered. When they mapped the path of these certifications onto the timeline, they saw something like an assembly line. Document templates appeared in clusters. Formatting was too consistent. Time periods when a busy office would normally look chaotic were instead perfectly aligned. It did not look careless. It looked like an internal standard. Work fast, work evenly, follow the template. So the system looks at it and nods. There was a moment in the investigation room that was not dramatic but deeply important. A former staff member was brought in, not because she was a key player, but because she had lived inside that rhythm. She glanced at a few document samples, scanned a few timelines, and said something very ordinary. Everyone there was told to follow the steps. If you followed the steps, nobody asked questions. It sounded harmless, but to the investigators, it unlocked everything. Because if the system is designed so everyone only follows the steps, very few people ever stop to ask, what are these steps for? By now, they had 4 elements: file rhythm, authority, money rhythm, and document flow. But 4 elements are still just 4 piles of data without the next step. And the next step is what decides whether this becomes a system case or not. Putting them together, they built a unified timeline, 4 layers stacked on top of each other: file statuses, money movement, approval authority, certifications, and notarizations. When all 4 began to move in the same clustered patterns, it stopped being coincidence. It was a rhythm, and inside that rhythm, they found the bottlenecks, not the obvious things like safes or guns. Small steps everyone assumes are routine: a confirmation that documents were received, a status change to in process, a signature on a secondary form, a payment approval. Each step alone was harmless. But if one person could control the timing of those steps, that person did not just control files. That person controlled flow. Here, everything collapsed into one cold question: who allowed this to run for so long? Not who was in on it in a movie sense, but who signed off on authority, who dismissed warnings, who assumed that following procedure was enough. Because no system turns into this by accident, without time, without trust, and without the fatigue of people who just want the work to keep moving. When investigators looked at the merged data board one last time that night, they did not celebrate. They agreed on one thing: if this rhythm existed here, it likely did not exist only here. And if they gave it more time, the rhythm would change, authority would shift, and the trail would thin out until it felt like it had never been there. So the next phase was not go find more evidence in the traditional sense. The next phase was to act by the same logic as the opponent. Hit across the board, hit fast, cut the rhythm before the machine could shift into a new one. The decision was locked in inside the data room with one short line: hit at the same time, not for optics, so the other side would not have time to change the rhythm. Before the sun was fully up, teams split off like a clock hand snapping into a new minute. Each team carried a short list. Not go search, go collect exactly what had already been outlined. On the outskirts of Minneapolis, a self-storage unit door rolled up. No big noise, just metal locks and dry footsteps. Inside were plastic bins stacked high, labeled documents, old files, printers. One agent did not open anything right away. He called an inventory specialist over, set a scale on the floor, and pulled one bin onto it. The number appeared. Too heavy for paper. The lid came off. Not paper. Sealed bundles, stacked like commercial stock. The inventory specialist read out each item by procedure, one by one, so it went into the record. Weight, count, seal numbers. Another agent stood beside him, not watching the bin. He watched the clock and his phone. Point 1 is cut. Point 1 came back. Power locked. In St. Cloud, a short-term rental room sat on the second floor of an unremarkable building. The door opened with a key. No need to force it. Inside were printers, drives, and reconciliation logs updated on a cycle. What they needed was the original. A tech pulled the drive, sealed it on site. On the screen, a cross-reference table sat in columns. File code, time marker, internal symbol. No one needed to understand it all in the room. They needed one thing: take the original and do not let it disappear. An agent lifted a packet of documents, flipped straight to a page that had been marked in advance. He did not say much. He said, "Same rhythm." Then the packet went into an evidence bag. In Burnsville, the third team hit the first moment that changed the color of the air. The unit was the right address, the right number, but a row of locker doors had 2 new locks, like they had just been replaced. The facility manager said it like it was nothing. Someone changed them yesterday. A normal sentence, but in a rhythm-cut operation, that sentence is an alarm. No one argued. One person called legal. One person moved in for close-up video. One person held distance. They did what they had trained to do. Do not let one small detail knock the plan off track. When the locks were opened properly, there was a thin false panel tight to the bottom. Lift it, and pre-sealed file envelopes appeared, coated like merchandise, not paperwork. The inventory specialist started counting, not to show off, to lock it down, to make sure no one could bend the story later. In Brooklyn Park, another team opened a fourth unit. No new locks, no false panel, just one thing that made people go cold. Everything here was too correct. Every bin the same type. Every label the same font. Every strip of tape the same stick, the same direction, like it came from a process. In a normal storage unit, people leave error. Here, error had been removed. An agent pulled a bin down and opened it. Inside was not product. It was stacks of certifications, pre-signed, sorted by date. There were days where the volume spiked. There were days with 0. Those dates matched the clusters the data room had already circled. The spike days and the 0 days matched the exact clusters. At the same time, in Minneapolis, a smaller team showed up somewhere most people do not picture when they hear raid. A small office connected to bond services and scheduling. No safe, no storage. Just computers, work calendars, and appointment lists. They were not looking for crime. They were looking for rhythm. A staff member opened the screen under the warrant. Everything looked normal. But when investigators demanded calendar exports by time blocks, the gaps began to show up in a way that was too even. One investigator said it, short and cold. Someone taught them how to schedule, and he marked a time column. In the command room, the big screen did not show live cameras. It showed a cut status board. Each time a team reported collected, a box changed color. No clapping, just one line repeated like a pulse check. Point 2. Done. Point 3. Done. As teams cut link after link, the outside connections started to rise more clearly, not from storage units, but from things that seemed emotionless. Transfer templates and intermediary nodes. A financial investigator threw a comparison sheet onto the screen. He did not read it out. He just pointed to one column. Transactions that looked like services, but the destinations and the pooling pattern showed an organization style that did not match a small crew. No name was said yet, only this line. Not local. Then came the moment they needed confirmation, not for shock, but to lock the direction of the case. One person stood, set a sheet of paper on the table like a period at the end of a sentence. On it were matched results from multiple sources. File rhythm, money rhythm, intermediary links, and an operating route to the south. The name was read once, with no emphasis. Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación. No one commented. The note-taker read it back once. Heads nodded. The name was confirmed. The teams kept moving down the list. Back in Minneapolis, a team opened a cabinet in a secondary location once dismissed as storage. Inside were weapons stored in layers, not displayed, not shown off. One here, one there. A total of 29 when counted across the different sites. The number was read into the record, then sealed immediately. No one wanted it to become a scene. Their goal was not to showcase weapons. Their goal was to prove this place had been prepared to hold control at any cost. In St. Cloud, the technical team found a set of duplicate ledgers printed on a cycle. Same paper, same binding, same note style. Someone flipped fast, then stopped on one page, a page with an internal symbol column that matched the code on the warehouse comparison chart. He said only, "This is where they connect." That page was photographed, time-stamped, and placed into evidence. In Burnsville, the facility manager began changing his tone, trying to steer the story toward, "I don't know anything." The team did not argue. They asked one question. Who changed the locks yesterday? No one answered. The camera kept rolling. The question did not need an answer on site. It needed to exist in the record. In the command room, an investigator watched the rhythm board on the screen. The clusters that used to move steadily were now still. Some lines were still active, but scattered, no longer matching. That was the key sign. When the rhythm is cut, the system is forced into manual response. And manual response always leaves a human trace. One person said, "They'll patch it." Another answered, "They won't patch it in time." By the end of the day, the summary appeared on the board. Not to brag, to lock the record. The money flow was framed by cycle, a total of $187.3 million across 28 months moving through a legal doorway. The ghost files were separated from real files, a deliberate buffer layer. Weapons were gathered in enough volume to show preparation, a total of 29 across multiple locations. And the organization behind it had been confirmed, so from here on, this was no longer an administrative irregularity. It was part of a cross-border network. The montage ended on a simple image that carried weight. The rhythm board on the screen sat still longer than usual. No more even clusters. No more status changes running on schedule. Just empty space. That empty space said one thing. The machine had been cut off from its rhythm. And once the machine was cut off from its rhythm, the question shifted to something no raid can answer for you. Who signed? Who looked away? Who let following the steps replace following the substance for all that time? The morning after the operation, the fastest thing moving was not a vehicle. It was text messages. Phones on the support lines started overloading early. Callers did not ask, "How is the case?" They asked one thing: is my file going to be affected? Some people read out a name and a case number, then went silent. Some begged for a confirmation, any confirmation, then hung up. Out in the community, the reaction did not move in one direction. It split almost immediately. One side saw it as targeting the community, as overreach, as an attack on a place that helped people survive through paperwork. The other side said it plainly. This was something everyone had heard whispers about for a long time. No one wanted to be the first to say it out loud. The argument was not about money. It was about who was telling the truth. Organizations that had once appeared in the same frame with that office began clearing their traces in a familiar way. Photos came down. Old posts disappeared. Events were postponed. Names stopped being mentioned. There were no long statements, just small, quick actions done in a hurry. Some people sent emails asking for clarification, then deleted them right away. Not because they were guilty, because they were afraid of being pulled into something they did not control. The heaviest weight landed on the weakest people, the ordinary clients. Some files were held back for review. Some were told to resubmit documents. Some people were called in and asked the same questions again, just phrased differently. For them, this was not a story about a criminal case. This was about jobs, lease agreements, schools, families. Everything hinged on the status of a file. Inside the agencies, the response was quiet but clear. Access rights were audited. Confirmation steps that once required only a timed click now required a named person to be responsible. Some procedures were changed within the week. Some accounts were locked pending review. No one called it reform. They were just making sure it would not repeat. The media focused on imagery, a couple, a front, a fortress. But inside the investigation, they were looking at something else. Habits. The danger in this case was not a warehouse or a gun. It was the fact that everything could run smoothly for a long time because everyone was used to the phrase, as long as the steps are followed. A few days later, something began to shift. People became more cautious with each other. Anyone who had referred clients to that office was questioned again. Anyone who had signed a partnership was asked to explain. People who had just handled paperwork realized paperwork was no longer a light task. No threats were needed. The system simply began looking back. After the operation, everything slowed down. People started rechecking steps they had once skipped. From here, the case moved into a different phase. No longer seizure. Now it was review, cutting access, retracing approval chains, seeing whose hands it had passed through, for how long, and why no one stopped it sooner.